Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to start today's show a little bit differently than I usually do. I'm going to actually start it with a short prayer because my guest today is a man of faith. And I think I'm free to start out in this particular fashion. Prayer, God, we offer ourselves to thee to build with us and to do with us as thou wilt. Relieve us of the bondage of self that we may better do thy will. Take away our difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those we would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May we do thy will always. Amen.
Amen.
Welcome to the Incomplete Skeptic Sober Wise Guy series. Here I interview old timers, that is, people who are 30 years or more clean generally. Sometimes I'll interview other people and break the mold, but that's generally what I'm after. And it's my experience that to some extent in recovery, old timers are occasionally marginalized. People assume they don't need positive reinforcement or that they have big egos and should be summarily dismissed as less important than newcomers in recovery. Newcomers are the lifeblood of AA, I would say, and of NA and of any A's, but there's a lot of us out there that were sober when it was just A. And if it weren't for the old timers, we'd be in a bit of trouble, you know? So the old timers are probably the backbone of recovery. However, God is the spirit of recovery, and that one has all power. May you find that one now. The objective of Sober Wise Guy is to share experience, strength, and hope to the still suffering alcoholic or addict, and to inform the public about what the recovered life looks like. My guest today is Reverend Dr. Edward Treat. Today on the Sober Wise Guy of the Incomplete Skeptic, I'll be interviewing him, but he'll be answering questions that come hopefully from the Holy Spirit. He was a Lutheran pastor in Bloomington. He realized his new calling, however, and founded the Center of Addiction and Faith, which attempts to better knit together the recovery and faith communities. He has a doctorate, a Doctor of Ministry, focused in mission and leadership from the Luther Seminary. He's an Addiction Crusader. I quoted him on that. I love it. Some people call him an addiction counselor. We'll go with Crusader today. He's now the founder and CEO of the Center of Addiction and Faith based in St. Boniface, Minnesota. His vision is to, I'm putting these in my words a little bit, his vision is to sustain a movement of God's Spirit to open the church and other faith communities to better understand the extensive ramifications of addiction of every kind and how to respond to it. Pastor Ed works, is it okay if I say Pastor Ed?
Yeah,
Okay.
Ed, whatever.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. Pastor Ed works to engender faith communities to bring a great deal of healing power, faith, to the problem of addiction. If we strive to understand the truth about this battlefield, we'll be better able to respond more faithfully rather than fearfully. Reverend Ed authored a book titled The Pastor. It's a book about sin and darkness, despair and hope, death and new life, winter and springtime. Maybe it could even be considered a book about the eternal Easter hope. It is available in hard copy, soft copy, Kindle, and Audible, and I will have a link in the recording for people to be able to find this. So welcome, Pastor Ed, to the Sober Wise Guy series.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you for that great introduction. You seem to know me better than I do.
Well, I prayed about it and then went on a search. So
you did your homework.
a little bit. I'm fond of saying if somebody likes something I did, don't give me any credit because I prayed about it. And if you don't like something that I've done, blame God because God's the reason I'm alive. So you know.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
So let's get into your recovery story a bit, if you don't mind. What is your, as they say, DOC, drug of choice?
Oh gosh, my first drug was alcohol, and that was always the one. That's the one that I drank, that I did the most, and it landed me in treatment. Wasn't my favorite, but it did most regularly. And I liked opioids. I liked the. I just read an article that said opioids trigger the same feeling as the feeling of love, and I thought, that's a great description. Yeah. So
Totally believe that. Yeah.
yeah.
I used to try find God in the bottom of a bottle and in the bottom in the center of a joint, both together. I'd smoke pot and go to church on occasion. So,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You
You're
ever
high
done
on
that?
God. Oh
Yeah.
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 If
Yeah.
I'd have known I could feel better without it, I'd have never did it in the first place. But oh well,
Yeah.
you learn as we learn as we learn. So, what is your sober date?
And it's coming up February 28th. For me, it was 1986.
Wow,
And
congratulations.
yeah, actually, I got sober in treatment the previous fall. So in 1985, the fall of '85, I remember it because the World Series was happening. It was the Kansas against it was the Cross City one. But anyway, the treatment center I went into I went in and said, I think I have an alcohol and a drug problem. And they said, that was back in 1986, and they were state funded. And they said, we don't treat drug problems here. We treat alcohol. And so immediately the state gave me permission to say, oh, I don't have a drug problem. I just have an alcohol problem. So I went into treatment thinking, oh, the pills were fine. And so I didn't really get off the pills until the following February. So I call that my clean date because I finally came clean and said I've been using, and so started my recovery from that date on.
So 86, February 28th. It's kind of ironic that the treatment systems are somewhat based around fiscal responsibility that is anything but responsible.
Right.
And it's not very enlightened, but insurance companies and like, but I digress.
Yeah. We could do a whole show on that, right?
Certainly could.
Yeah.
So I assume that you didn't sober up and get clean because your life was just a spectacular ball of wondrous events over and over again, or at least they didn't feel that way. What were you like before you sobered up?
Yeah, well, so I grew up in a big family, 8 kids, 6 boys, 2 girls. My dad was military. We were a Catholic family. We moved a lot. I thought it was pretty normal, happy family, I guess, because we laughed a lot. And it wasn't later that I learned that it was a crazy family. I've done the ACEs test. Have you heard of ACEs? ACE, adverse childhood experiences. And so I have. They say if you get 4 or more of the 10 questions as a positive, then you're really likely set up for addiction. And I had 7 out of 10 based on my upbringing. So. And of course, you don't have anything to compare it to. Thank you very much. I'm very proud of that score. I studied hard for that. So I grew up in a really fearful environment. We never knew what dad was going to beat us for something stupid or something little we had done. And he didn't just beat us; he would mentally make us suffer. He'd make us go. He'd say, "Go in the bathroom," and he'd make us sit in there for an hour just because. He knew we'd be sweating it out. We were going to get a belt when he finally arrived. He'd make us go pick out the belt to beat us with, and then we would get whipped until we had welts or even bleeding. And so he was just this guy that just would rage. And I mean, that's how he dealt with his brokenness, was he'd take it out on his kids. And of course, we took it out on each other. And the laughter that I thought was just part of this happy family was really us picking on each other and making each other the butt of jokes. And so it was really shaming and humiliating. And so I grew up in this environment of fear, of being beaten, of being humiliated, and assumed it was normal. When I was 12 years old, we drank some booze that we stole from our parents, and I drank for the first time. And that feeling came over me that was beyond description. I didn't know this feeling existed, but it felt amazing to me, and it fixed me. I wasn't afraid. I was not self-conscious. I was funny. It was just the best feeling ever. It was I think I was telling you that opioids make you feel like love. That's what it felt like. It felt like love. And And so I didn't make the conscious choice to be a drug user. I just knew that they worked for me. They fixed me on the inside, and they did it really quickly and effectively. And so I didn't see any downside to it. Of course, I'm 12. I don't have the brain to analyze or understand what I was doing, but I just knew that if there were drugs, alcohol around, I wanted some. So I became that guy that was around drugs and alcohol, and used them wherever I can find them, in just about any opportunity. I was high at school a lot, at home a lot, just whenever I could find them. It was my, that was the motivation for everything we did. Was there going to be some weed or some pot or some alcohol or some way to get high? And so I did that all the way through high school. And then I moved to Hawaii right out of high school, still 17 years old, but I lived on Maui for 3 years and worked and partied. And it's all a big blur. I don't remember much. It was just every night chasing the fun, looking for the parties and the girls. And so I, it's really kind of going down the road of the prodigal son, things were not getting better for me. They progressively got worse. I did geographical moves when things got so bad in Hawaii. I went to San Diego, moved in with my brother and his girlfriend there, and then wore out my welcome there and moved on to Phoenix, where an old high school buddy was living, and got a great job there as a waiter, and I made a lot of money and went out every night and snorted it up and drank it up. And so I just continued to kind of live like that until age 27. I was finally back home to my hometown in Bellingham, Washington, where we had grown up after my dad retired from the military. And my brother had gone off to treatment, and I used a lot with him. And then suddenly one day I heard he was off into treatment, and I was thinking, oh, it's probably good. He was kind of I drank and used as much as he did, but I thought, yeah, he has a problem. And I certainly didn't see it in myself. And then he came back and lived with me. He needed a place to live, so he moved in with me. It probably wasn't very smart on his side. If you're new in recovery, you don't want to live with somebody who's using like I was. But he enrolled in college. He started going back to school. He was going to the meetings, and he began to invite me to the meetings. And I realized that, I didn't realize that he was trying to get me well. He was trying to get me to a meeting. And I thought it was just because he had to go. And if he had to go, misery loves company. He just, wanted somebody there to support him. And I would just pity him. This poor guy, he's got to go to these meetings and have to spend the rest of his life not having any fun like I'm having, right? I perceived myself as living the right life, and he was sentenced to this life of nothingness. And so I pitied him. In fact, once I said to him, how long do you got to go to those meetings? And he said, about an hour. And I always turned down his offer. But one time I said, sure, I'll go. What the heck? So I went to an AA meeting. And I remember being very scared because I thought, what if I see somebody I know? How are they going to know? They're going to think I belong here. And it was really important to me that I not be affiliated, right? And then the meeting started, and what I didn't know was my brother had told the chairperson I was a newcomer. So everybody in the meeting was talking to me, and I was just really uncomfortable with that. I wanted to leave. I wanted to crawl under the table and get out of there. I wanted to stop the meeting and say, wait, I'm not here. I don't have this. I'm here for my brother. It's not for me. Of course, I didn't have the nerve to say that. So I just sat there and endured it. And then I realized the sharing was coming around the table, and they were going to expect me to say something. And I tell you, I was absolutely mortified by that. Just the thought that I would say, no, I just want to listen was just terrifying for me. I remember being struck by the sharing that I heard. These people were some of the most beat up people that I'd ever met. And they had gone through horrific stories. And here they were talking about it and laughing. And they were able to speak from their heart, and they could just talk. And they just, they said things that were wise. And I remember thinking that I couldn't relate to their stories because I thought, I wonder where you go if you're not as bad as these people are, because I like some of what's happening here, but I'm not this bad. And I'm not one of these people. I didn't want to be affiliated. But I do remember being attracted to the people that were sharing and being just amazed at how centered and grounded they seemed and how wise. And I just thought, how do they do that? I would love to be able to be that at peace with myself, where I could just talk in a room full of people. it just amazed me. But I couldn't. I was terrified of it. Didn't know that language. And my fear came true after the meeting. I ran into a guy that I'd gone to high school with named Mark. And he walked up to me and he said, "Hey, Ed, good thing you made it here, man. You look like shit." And I was like, "What? I know I look good, man. I'm working. I got a job. I'm managing a restaurant, and I don't, you know." And but what got my brother apologized all the way home. But to this day, I'm like, "Oh, that was a good thing for me to hear," because I thought I look good on this. I didn't think I felt like he could see how I felt, and so that really got to me. So I spent the next year of my life trying to convince myself I was in control. Those AA people were wrong. And so I tried to manage my use, and I kept failing. And I started thinking, man, they got into my head. I'm just psyched out here, you know, because I just didn't want this to be my problem. My brother went and poisoned my mom's mind against me, gave her an education about addiction. And so she started going to Al-Anon, and she began to confront me. And I would just always have a good excuse. And she said, I was so convinced, and I was so convincing. She said she would walk away from me at times to thinking, oh, maybe he doesn't have a problem. And that's how good my denial was. I knew there was something really, really wrong with my life. And I wanted to fix that, but I didn't want it to be drugs and alcohol. And I really didn't think it was drugs and alcohol. I thought, whatever's wrong with me, if I could fix that, then I would use alcohol and drugs like normal people do. And I wouldn't keep, you know, waking up with these horrible hangovers and all these horrible things I had done and said the night before, spent money I didn't have. And yeah, you know how when you have this issue, your life just gets progressively worse, and it was getting worse and worse. Well, I finally I left town. I lost a job, got fired. I left town. I moved to Tahoe, and I spent my last $700 on a bag of cocaine. We cut it. My buddy and I snorted it all night. Woke up the next morning, and I thought I was going to die. I couldn't breathe because I'd been smoking cocaine all night. And I was on the floor of, you know, it was 5 guys, party guys lived there. And so it was stinking, you know, smelled like dog poop and stale beer. And here I was in a foreign land starting my life over again, and I just couldn't bear it. I just couldn't take it. So I phoned home and said, I need help. And I was really, really hurt, and I cried. My mom said, well, we'll have your brother fly down and get you, and we'll get you into treatment. And I said, Mom, I really don't think treatment is what I need. I need something, and I'd like to figure out what that is. She said, all right, well, we'll just get you home and figure that out. They called the next day with a plan, and they said, we got a treatment center for you. And I said, you're not going to come get me? And they said, no, there's a bed waiting for you 2 miles from where you are. They know you're coming. And I got off the phone, and I was like, wow, what am I going to do here? And for some reason I went in, and what was powerful for me in those first 3 days of detox was watching Father Martin films. There was this priest that did these chalk talks. You remember those? Did you see those?
Yeah, well, I'm familiar with them to some extent, but by no means an expert. Yeah.
Right. Well, I went back and on YouTube to see if he was, you know, still I could find, and he's all his shows are there, and I highly recommend it. Even from 1986, he's using a chalkboard. I mean, it's old stuff, but it's still really good. He's a great presenter. But what he had to share, reading the big book and watching a couple other films and hearing some lectures on the disease model, I was like, oh my God, this explains everything. And light bulbs went off, and I went, oh my God, it's over. My long nightmare is over. And so from then on, I got sober, and then in February, the following February, I came home and went to an NA meeting with my friends and admitted that I'd been using, and started my recovery really from that day forward. So while that nightmare of all those hangovers and stupid behavior was done, here I was, 27 years old, and I had the emotional capability of a 12-year-old when I started drinking. And I still had all that brokenness from my childhood that had not been dealt with. I had accumulated crap that had not been dealt with, like my sister's death, which I never grieved. And I didn't find out about until about 3 years into my recovery that I hadn't grieved that. And those things just build up on a person, and they impact your life, and they make you make choices and decisions that they drive you in unhealthy ways. And so this program has been a slow process of addressing all of those things, and slowly becoming better. And I thought somehow I would arrive one day, but what I know now is this is just my ongoing journey. I still deal with those issues from my childhood. The scar tissue is still there. It gets triggered very easily. I need the program as much today as I did when I first walked in. So this is fellowship keeps me sane, and I'm grateful that I have this disease, because what I found here has been far better than anything else I've seen out there in terms of how to go through life. Having rooms full of people who care about you and understand what you're going through and will share your burdens. Most people don't have that. And I get that, because I have this disease that forces me to be in loving relationships with other human. It's really quite a gift.
Amen, man. Making our wounds our wisdom is not always the right of luxury. We're not in God's limo or something, and Jesus comes and opens the door for us and throws out a red carpet. It doesn't look like that, but in reality, I think it is. We have no idea just how blessed we are until we look back and realize just, I don't know. I don't regret one day myself. And like you, I've had some pretty big hits in life, but what you do with it, it's like whatever we hold up, whatever difficulty or pain we hold up to grace turns into a miracle, and I think it was Ernie Larson who said something along those lines.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you just.
No, it's good. I think that was the answer to your question, what it was like for me and how I ended up here. Yeah.
Well, that leads me, of course, to the next question. What do you like now?
Right. What happened? What do you like now?
Yeah.
Well, so like I said, it sent me on this new journey of recovery, and so I started going to step meetings, and I tell you, those were hard. I think I had so much brokenness inside that I was terrified that anybody might see it. I came to that honestly, because I grew up in a family where if you showed any weakness, it got exploited. Mm-hmm. And so for me to go into meetings and open up was just, it went against every bit of grain. My brother asked me to introduce him for his 1-year anniversary, because he was way ahead of me. And so I was still really new in recovery. And so I got up and presented him his coin, but I was so absolutely terrified. I was shaking. I couldn't get my head to stop. I was just, I lost sleep for days. So I would sit step meetings, and it felt like Russian roulette, that who's going to get called on next, and it could be you. And every time somebody finished sharing, you'd feel that run of adrenaline. And in my mind, I'm scrambling to put my thoughts together. What am I going to say? Here's what I say about that. And I have it. And then a second later, I've forgotten, and I panic because what was I going to say? So I got all that, running through my head. I'm just a mess inside. And these 12-step meetings are just a place that I was challenged to grow up and deal with my emotions. Life is sort of an onslaught. It just keeps coming. And it keeps coming, and I just want to run away from all that. I don't like that. I don't like people's emotions. I don't like pressure. I don't like responsibility, and I just want to go hide. And so drugs worked really well for that. You could just turn it all off. And so here I'm in recovery, facing the onslaught of life, facing life on life's terms. And life's terms to me are unacceptable many times. There's so much about life that I find unacceptable and unfair, right? Don't we? But you don't get to decide how you live. You don't get to dictate the terms. Life determines what life is going to be, and you just have to make peace with that. And that's a long, slow, hard process. And so I did a lot of therapy. I've done lots of workshops. I told you about the grief of my sister. I was going through a family workshop with a guy named John Hughes, and he would do family sculpting. And basically it was coming out of family systems theory that talks about family systems theory says, we're all part of systems, and in a family as a system. And when one part of the system is sick, like the addict would be the one who's presenting the symptoms for the whole system. So that's why when an addict gets treated, if the whole system doesn't get treated, the addict probably won't succeed because he gets put back in this sick system. So you have to treat the whole system. You have to treat the whole family, or else, success for recovery. And so, so I went to this workshop, and he did this family sculpting thing where you got to pick the people in the room who were also on this therapeutic weekend to play parts of your family. And then this guy would pose them in positions that represented what they were like to you in life. My dad had a belt. He was, a fist and an angry face. And my mom was like, don't hurt us. My sister was dancing because she was trying to keep everybody happy, keep the craziness away. And then there was my other sister, who the one who I died when I was 12 years old, 12, 14, somewhere in there. It was a sudden death, and it rocked our world. I mean, it just, devastated us. And we never talked about it. I didn't come out of a happy, healthy family. We didn't deal with grief. We stuffed it. And so when it was my turn to do this sculpture of my family, I thought to myself, this is I can see why this is helpful for people, but I don't know that it's going to do much for me. Well, I was the worst one in the room, and in terms of reactions, he had me walk to each person in this family statue and talk to them. And then I got to my sister Angie, who died, and I looked at this woman playing my sister, and I just started bawling, and I mean really bawling. I had snot running down my face, and people had to come and hug me, and it was I couldn't stop, and it was pouring out of me. And he said, "Oh my God, you've never grieved this. You've been holding this in for how long? 12 years now, 13." And he says, "It's like holding a beach ball underwater. Your emotions, and that beach ball wants to come up, and you have to work to keep it down emotionally. That's what it's like when you're stuffing things that big." Anyway, so those are the kinds of things I've worked on throughout my recovery. And I've really come to believe that people who use addictively, many of them are not bad people doing bad things, which is what our society wants to say, but they're good people who are hurting, and they're trying to medicate their pain. Mm-hmm. And that's why we need to treat addiction with compassion and not judgment. And we need to change the whole stigma around it. These are people who are hurting, who need our hand, not our accusations. Anyway, so I started my journey of recovery, and when I got strong enough, I went back to school, community college, because my high school grades weren't any good, and I graduated with an AA degree with honors, and moved to the University of Washington State University, and got a degree in journalism. Part of my journey that leads to the work that I'm doing today is that I've always believed in God. Even as a little kid, I knew God was there, and I don't know why I knew that. I just knew it. It's just like I couldn't imagine there not being a God there. I would always talk to God, and I knew God was watching, and I just always felt that. And so when my sister died, we left the Catholic Church, because that's a whole nother story, but the priest never came to see us, and they didn't really handle it well. And so we got mad at the church and left. And then I bounced around to different churches. I went to, some of the more Pentecostal holy roller churches, and just tried to find, a relationship with God. And I would just bounce in and out of churches, and I would walk away going, I don't think I'm not like these people. I just couldn't see that I fit there with these churchy types. They just seemed like a different animal. And so I would go there looking for help or looking for meaning, direction in my life. And I would walk away going, I don't really feel welcome there. I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel like they're my people. And that happened many times in the process of my finally getting off the treatment. And then in recovery, after I'm in the program for a while, and I'm starting to get my head together a little bit, I feel like I think I want to get back to church and get back with God. And so I would go to church, and I tried different churches again. And now in recovery, I'm bouncing in and out of churches, feeling the same thing. Like I don't I don't feel connected here. I don't feel like these people are like me. I don't feel like they struggle with the same things I do. And I had to meet with a sponsor and really work that through. And he just said, you know what, make AA your church. Because I had said to him, I said, I read the Bible and I know, Jesus is like my big hero. And the things I saw him say and do seem like they happen more in the 12-step meetings than anything I ever see in church. And so he said, well, make that your church. So I did that, but I never felt right about it. I felt like, there was something in church that I felt drawn to, but I don't know that I could have named it. And so I kind of gave up on the church. But at my senior year of college, I could talk all day. I just want to make sure that I don't use up all my, if you need me to wind up, give me a high sign, because, I can give you more than you ever want to hear. So my senior year of college, doing all right? Okay.
Yep.
So my senior year of college, a friend and I in the programs during spring break, we thought, let's go find God. And so we get out a map of Washington State, and we're going to find God in the wilderness, because we figured that's where God resides, right? God's in the wilderness. So we see this big section of green in the upper left-hand corner of the map. It's the North Cascades National Park, and there's no roads going in. You have to. It's very isolated, and the only way in there is to hike. And the quickest way to the center of that wilderness was to take a boat from the city of Chelan, or the town of Chelan. It's a 3-hour boat ride. They chug up this long, skinny lake, and they drop you at a town called Stehekin. It's not really a town. It's one restaurant. It's a hamburger joint that runs during the summers, and that's it. That's all that's there in Stehekin. But it's a trailhead for getting into that wilderness. And so we're going to go up to Stehekin and be alone with God. And when we get on this boat, about 40 other people got on, and we're just dismayed, because we're like, oh man, we wanted to be alone in the wilderness. And so I said, are you guys going to Stehekin? And one lady said, no, we're going to Holden Village. And I was like, what's that? And they said, well, it's a Lutheran camp in the mountains. It used to be a copper mine, and the church took it over, and they operated as a remote adult retreat center. And I thought, oh, great, we're on a boatload of happy Christians. And when I say that, my perception of Christians was people who pretend to be okay, but never talk about their feelings or show any signs of weakness or humanity. And so that's kind of a generalization, but that was my perception. It's like, oh, great, we're on a boatload of...
The proverbial frozen chosen.
Well, yeah, it was, that was kind of my feeling when I would go to these, would go to 12-step meetings. People talk about what they're struggling with, and I go to church and everybody pretend like everything's fine. And it felt like the conversations were all superficial, nothing real, nobody really struggling with anything bigger. And so I would say, to be a Christian, you have to pretend like everything's okay. I mean, that's what it felt like. If you wanted to, that's what it felt like. And that's why I didn't feel like I fit in. Well, it wasn't until later that I found out that Lutherans aren't all that happy. They actually have a theology that says God meets us in the dark places. God meets us most profoundly in the dark places. And I was like, yeah, right. I mean, that's where I look back on my life and I think all the worst moments of my life have turned out to be my biggest gifts. My sister's death, my coming into treatment, worst days of my life, but the best. They gave me so much, and I know my relationship with God was profoundly impacted by those really horrible events. And so God, the Lutheran theology of the cross, as opposed to a theology of glory, which says, if you love and believe and trust in Jesus Christ, things will go swimmingly. You'll sail through life and you'll be blessed. And the theology of the cross says, no, we commit our lives to journeying with those who suffer and finding God in suffering and joining our lives to others who suffer, which is, the 12th step is to carry the message to those who still suffer, which means you have to go to places of suffering to share that message. So I felt like, well, this is a theology that works for me. I could see myself in this church. But the real thing was, so we're on this boat trying to get as far away from society as we can. And I ask these people where they're going. They say Holden Village. And I say, and then one of the ladies says, show them the flyer. So the lady pulls out of her flyer, this flyer that is inviting people to Holden Village for a weekend workshop to learn about the 12 steps. Yeah. And I'm like, I showed it to my buddy, Roger. And I said, Roger, look at this. He said, oh my God, we are everywhere. We're on a boatload of people in recovery wanting to learn about recovery. And So they find out we're in recovery and they say, oh, you should come with us. So we said, okay, what the heck? We went to find God. Apparently we did. And so we went with these Lutherans back into the mountains. And for me, it was sort of a homecoming because I thought, my church and my recovery in the same place. And it was like two things I valued greatly in my life, and I didn't want to give up one for the other. So I found where that could come together. And so I fell in love with the Lutherans. I volunteered at this camp for the following summer, met my wife there, and then decided to go to seminary there. I thought I want to go study. I had a journalism degree. I just started my career writing for a newspaper, and I knew I didn't love that. And so we were at Holden, and my wife and I spent the evening in the sauna with some Lutheran pastors, and we were telling the Raunchy you've ever heard and laughing hard. Raunchy jokes are really funny when they're being told by people who shouldn't be telling them. And extra funny. Friends are okay. They're real people, they're just real people. And so I was really drawn by that. I'm getting an unstable connection signal. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you are. There have been a few hiccups earlier in the program, but you've been okay. I don't know if you have a background program or something that's.
Oh, I don't think so. I restarted my computer to make sure nothing's running, but I think my service here is a little bit lame. So I went off to seminary, went and applied, and they accepted me, and I went there not to be a pastor. I said I want to come here and study God and know the Bible, and I want to know truth. I don't want to know, I don't want to know fairy tales. I want to know truth. I want to know real truth. What's really true? And they said, well, we do that. And I said, well, what can I do besides be a pastor? And they said, well, we pretty much make pastors. We like that you're not sure. We're always kind of suspicious of those who think they know exactly what God wants for them. Mm-hmm. And so I liked that answer. I said, all right, I'm coming. So about 3 months in, I came home to my wife and I said, I've made an enormous mistake. I said, the Lutheran Church is not Holden Village. They were not. The Holden Village is sort of an exceptional place, and it's very inclusive, and it's very diverse, and they're very tolerant. And there was all kinds of, there were Buddhists there. There were all kinds of, it was just really open community. And this was a lot more. I thought I would deepen my spirituality and do stuff to grow spiritually at seminary, and it turns out it was mostly just academic. It was mostly research, studies, writing papers, not too much. Anyway, I was just like, this is not what I wanted. And so I had to really struggle with that. And it was really a moment of existential angst. Mm-hmm. And about in the midst of that, I heard about this group of pastors getting together in Chicago recovery. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go there. So I drove to Chicago, spent a weekend with these Lutheran pastors. They were forming a new group called the Fellowship of Recovering Lutheran Clergy. And they wanted to be there for other pastors because back in 1990, when we were meeting, aren't supposed to have this problem. So when they did, and we know pastors are as vulnerable as anybody, but when they did have this problem, they were basically taken behind the barn and shot. We had a saying that, Lutherans kill their wounded. And so we were saying, wait a minute, this has been determined to be a disease, and the Pilots Association have support professionals, the nurses have a support system for professionals, and why can't we do treating how we treat pastors? And so we've advocated for that for 30 years. I joined this group, we became this 501c3, and for the last 18, it's been there for, I've been the director for the last 18, and we just small operation, but we try to be there, especially new and who are thinking their life is over, and we're there for them to say, no, it's not, and we can help you. So, we do provide all kinds of resources for clergy. So, that made me realize that maybe this is work I could do. I could be a pastor to people in recovery. I made peace with seminary and with what it meant to be a pastor. Last thing in the world as a pastor. I mean, it's still kind of surprised that God would I feel disqualified based on my past, that wasn't even an option. My best friend in recovery and in life came to my ordination and said, he said, if they only knew who they were ordaining, because he sees how I am, I'm just myself. And he said, if they only knew who they were ordaining. And I said, Chris, and they still want to ordain that I have this path. And so, there are things I really love about the Lutheran Church. They really do have a good theology and a theology of grace that says we accept you where you are. My beef with the church, this church and every church, is that they don't want to talk about this problem. They don't know what to do with it. And so that's been my frustration over the last 25 years as a pastor and now being a crusader, is trying to shake up the church to say, you know what, this is a problem. You've got it, the world has it, and you need to start addressing it. And so that's my prophetic call by God to be a crusader.
And that's why you started the center?
Yeah, well, and I wish I could say that was sort of some master plan, but how the center got started is another story. So about 4 years ago, 2016, I attended a meeting at the University of Minnesota, and it was a gathering of all the state leaders, the movers and shakers, the governor, Amy Klobuchar, state senators, the sheriffs from all over the state, all the treatment professional, Hazelden, everybody who was somebody was at this meeting to talk about the opioid crisis and what are we going to do about it. So the legislators got up, and Amy, this is what happened. I was at that time thinking about putting together a fellowship for Lutherans in recovery, people who aren't clergy. I thought, I bet there's some Lutherans out there who are in recovery, would like to be a part of a fellowship. So I was thinking about that. And then I attended this thing, and Amy Klobuchar got up and said, we're doing everything we can in our power to deal with the opioid crisis. But what's happening is, because we can control access, like prescriptions hard and telling doctors they can only give so many in a prescription and taking some steps like that, we can make it harder for people to get opioids. And if they can't get their opioids legally, they're going to illegal sources. And that's where the danger is, because that's where the drug supply is tainted with fentanyl and that are killing people. So actually the steps they were taking was making the death rate get worse, not better. And they were out of ideas. And they said, we need everyone to realize this is a problem that affects every single one of us. So we need everybody to step up and see that. And I just thought, the church could, there's a church on every street corner in every town in this country, or a synagogue or a mosque, faith communities of every kind. And very few of them are doing anything with addiction. And if they would all just start doing something, a little bit of something, a little education, maybe a brochure in the narthex, or just a statement in their bulletin saying, we care about addiction and we, here are resources. Anyway, if we could get them to do this, my colleagues in the Fellowship of Recovering Lutheran Clergy, we all lament the fact that seminaries of every denomination, very few of them are offering courses on addiction. They may hit on it during a pastoral care course, a week of information or a small book to read, but hardly a real introduction. So the competencies when it comes to addiction with clergy and people of faith leaders, they don't get it. They don't understand this disease, and they don't understand addiction, which to me is crazy, because I think addiction explains just about all of human nature in ways that I think are important. So I think, why are we sitting out spiritual leaders who don't understand this spiritual disease, which is, in everyone to some degree? As a mainline church, we have similar practices to most of the other mainline churches, and most of them begin worship with a statement that says, we're in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. Well, that's a statement of addiction. When we say that, we're saying to God, I say and do and think things that are harmful, and I can't seem to stop without your help. And so we need your help, God, to stop doing this. So, that's everybody's got some addiction in them. It's just some of us have it worse than others. And so to understand how that works is really kind of important, I would think, if you're going to talk about God and spirituality. And so we just said we need to educate our church and our church leaders. And so we put on it's not inviting people in recovery, but inviting spiritual leaders and we invite them to say, come and learn how to care for people with addiction problems. And so this isn't for you. If people think it's for them, or that feeling I had when I went to my first AA meeting, I was worried if the stigma is so bad that I think that's probably why the church doesn't want to do this. Pastors wouldn't want a conference like this because people would go, oh, do you think he's got a problem? Is that why he's going to that conference? And so that's a big hurdle for us to get past. So we had to push really hard to say, this is a professional conference for professionals to learn. And we offered CPEs and all that stuff. And so we put together this conference, and it was a little terrifying because I knew that churches don't really pay attention to this problem, even after trying so many ways to try to raise it. And here we were going to try to put on a big conference at a hotel. And I had a few sleepless nights wondering, if I'm going to have to leave the country or go to jail because I had committed to all these speakers and to the hotel, and we were in like 50 grand of commitment, and the FRLC has a budget of $4,000. So I thought, man, I don't, what have I done? And I couldn't get out. I thought I can only go forward. I'm committed now. So anyway, I lost some sleep over that. 40 or 50 people, we had to cut off registration at 200. And what really amazed us is these pastors and other leaders came from 34 different states and Canada, and from 17 different denominations. And we weren't even marketing. I mean, we put it in our newsletter for our church, we put it on Facebook, but apparently the word there, and they came from all over. And we just went, wow, the church is finally ready to have this conversation. The mountaintop gathering, everybody left there just excited. We had some lives transformed. A couple of pastors who had their eyes off said, oh my God, I didn't know any of this. So we did it again in 19, and we had an even bigger turnout and some bigger names. And after that, all my colleagues said, Ed, you need to do that. You need to make this your work. And I at the time was a full-time senior pastor at a large church in Minneapolis, and churches are bigger here than average. So it was a great call. It was a lot of responsibility. So I said, yeah, I want to do this, but I have a full-time job, and this is a lot of work. And so I began the process of praying about it and wondering, what am I going to do here? And I've got, I still have one son in college. I have 3 other kids, a mortgage and all the trappings of modern life. I thought, how do I do this? How do I make this work? And then in November of 2019, gave my notice. I said, I'm going to leap. A lot of times we want to have our ducks lined up before we'll take a step of faith. We want to know that there's a safety net there, or we have, that it's going to be okay. So we say, we pray, God, show me that it's going to be okay. And then I'll do it. It's sort of like my favorite passage in scripture is when Moses has got the people, he's managed to get them away from Herod or from Pharaoh, and he's right by the Red Sea. And the Pharaoh has changed his mind. He's going to go out and destroy all these Israelites. And so they're praying, and the army is aligned against not to be destroyed. And Moses goes to God and says, why did you bring us out here to kill us? Why would you do this to us? And God says to Moses, this is what I love. He says, tell the people to quit praying and get going. And it was like, get going where? But the point is that God was saying, you're waiting for a way to open, and I'm saying, go and I'll open the way. And so I had sort of, working on my to say, you know what, this is what God wants me to do. All the streams of my life has led up to this. My wife supported the decision. Everybody else was saying, yeah, you should do this. So I left my job and paying benefits a year ago and formed a ministry called the Center of Addiction and Faith. And we decided we would be an annual conference where we gather leaders to educate and inspire and equip. And in the meantime, we would offer other resources year round through our website. So we built a really robust website with a lot of resources Started doing a monthly webinar like this, where we invite really smart people from around the world to come and talk about what they know about addiction. We're really into science and faith-based, evidence-based practices, things that are working, that we know are working, and we bring people in like that to say. What's amazing is we started these webinars we've been doing it for about a year and a half every month. We've never had less than 200 people register. And we're amazed by that. As new as we are, and the topic we're covering, to have that much interest to us is just really, really exciting. And our subscription list grows by about 150 a month. Every day I get an email from the world who wants our help. Last night I got one from Myanmar, a pastor there, who says, "Do you have anything in this language?" I can't remember the name of the language that he told me. I said, "No, we don't have it in that language, but I would love your help in translating." Anyway, so there's huge need, as you well know. COVID crisis has made it even worse. So, and I could add,
isolation is no friend to addiction. That's for sure.
No, that's right. In fact, that's the place it leads you to. And recovery is all about coming out of isolation.
I interrupted something.
So I was going to just kind of tell you what happened after I left my job up until now. So I quit my job, and I've got all these speaking arrangements lined up. I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., New Orleans, and I've got North Dakota, and I got about 4 or 5 places that have invited me to come and talk. And then COVID hit. And then I was like, what have I done? Quit my job, and now I can't go promote this new ministry. I thought, I'm in big trouble. What have I done? And I'm just really struggling to figure out what's next. But as it turns out, COVID forced everybody how to learn Zoom. I mean, we couldn't have done this 2 years ago, meetings like this. And with Zoom, we can gather people far and wide in all kinds of creative new ways. And so we started doing the webinar. I started doing a podcast. We started doing sessions online for teaching congregations how to put together ministry teams to know, to be a resource to the community on addiction, and so all kinds of stuff like that. And so we just realized that we're a virtual ministry. And so this, COVID really sort of made that a reality. It's like, we would never have thought of this, but COVID has forced it upon us, and what a gift, because we have 12-step meetings online now, and we have people come from 3 different countries, pastors, clergy-only meeting, and about 8 different denominations to talk about what it's like to be clergy in recovery, and never have happened before COVID. And so yeah,
congratulations. I think that has been traditionally a tough nut to crack. I'm glad to see you're making progress. I'm just wondering if all pastors would be welcome, or is there certain religions that you would ixnay? If a Mormon bishop or somebody wanted to weigh in and listen, you wouldn't dismiss.
We have a Jewish rabbi on our board, and what we're concerned, addiction, not religion. And so we're not pushing religion, we're pushing the healing power of faith and addiction. The AA program, the 12 steps, has really formed my theology. I came into recovery with, this sort of this Christian know-it-all, and this kind of I've got the answers because I've got Jesus in my hip pocket. And turns out I had a lot of unlearning to do, and learning to be tolerant of others' views and beliefs, and that we can learn a lot from each other. And I have Buddhist friends who teach me stuff all the time, and I can translate those things into my Christian faith. I'm not threatened by them, and I think God is at work, in these other religions as much as He is in mine. And so one of our founding principles, or our values at the Center of Addiction and Faith, is theological humility, where we come to the table saying, I don't have all the answers, and I don't believe anybody does. I don't know who God is, but I can share with you what I think, and I want to hear what you think. And it turns out even those same denomination or in the same faith, we don't all believe the same thing. I mean, we're all over the place. It's astonishing how different our understanding of God is and how God works. And so, yeah, I mean, God is working. Apparently, there's a lot of variety with God. And if we can tolerate that, you know, you know, it's when we get intolerant, especially theologically, that the world suffers.
Yeah, I
We
think
have to
the addiction to judgment has been holding people back. And, you know, and I see it really strong in some religious circles, and more so in churchianity than in Christianity.
Yeah.
But wherever you have a human being, you will find imperfection, and you know, my shortcomings are not better than your shortcomings.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, none of us are in a position to judge, right? I mean, it's not.
Yeah, I hope not.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I like what Gandhi said. He said, I do like your Christ. I just don't like your Christians.
Right. Yeah, I think he was. I think he was onto something there. You know.
Yeah. Well, it's because, you know, because everybody's human, and we all bring our garbage as well as our. But God, anyway, you know, that's the beauty of grace, is to say, is we can be broken and perfect at the same time.
My old sponsor, I don't know if you ever had the opportunity to meet her. Her name was Mary Jo Robinson. She had started the Christ Recovery Center, she and her husband, George. And she's been passed away some while, but she used to pass on some pretty useful information to me. And I think she would have loved to have gotten involved with your group if she could have, you know.
Yeah.
But one thing she told me is never get into a pissing contest with a skunk. That was good information. And she said, you know, I didn't totally buy this. I changed it a little bit, but she said, we don't get ready to meet God. We meet God to get ready. And I think I generally get that, you know, but it's almost like a chicken or the egg thing. And, but, you know, I've had a lot of miracles happen in my life that I had no idea was a miracle. I had a spiritual experience, and it might have taken 20 years to have the spiritual awareness of the spiritual experience, you know. And, you know, so she gave me a lot of lessons that turned into lifetime lessons. So I'm always grateful to her for that. But, you know, I learned during the dark night of the soul what my superpower was. And my superpower was not committing suicide. And the reason I didn't commit suicide was twofold. And it was a 3.5 year period, and it was while I was sober. So I didn't drink over it. That would have been pretty bad, you know. But one was step 3. I turned my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand God, and it wasn't my life to take. It belonged to God. So I just constantly asked God to kill me, but he wouldn't do it. And you know, I said, would you please kill me? I don't want to.
Yeah.
And the second one was in, you know,
sometimes it seems a lot easier to be dead, doesn't it?
Oh, way easier. Yeah, it's a way easier to kill yourself than to stay alive, you know. It takes courage to stand in the fire, you know. And but that process burned off everything that I wasn't and left only what I was. And so it was very useful. And part of the other reason I didn't commit suicide is I realized that if I wanted to be able to help somebody, if I was dead, I couldn't do it. And if they were going through what I was going through and they needed some help and I failed to go through it, I couldn't be there to help them know that you can get to the other side of it. And, you know, I had a couple hundred breakthroughs during that dark night of the soul that I kept thinking was a breakthrough toward it's over. And it actually was a breakthrough into a deeper dive into what I needed to release. And, you know, 2.5 years, brother, 2.5 years, the first 2.5, I wanted to kill myself every day, all day. And that's all I could think about. And, you know, yet I held down a job and worked at nights, and it was a miracle of God that I was able to keep a job. And the last year of the 3.5 were, I only wanted to kill myself 3 or 4 or 5 times a day. So it was a lot better, you know, and, you
There
know,
was some relief.
yeah. So that was
Yeah.
my superpower. But everything that, I mean, now I look back, I wouldn't trade one moment
Yeah.
of it. And even pain can be very beautiful. And while you
Yeah.
were talking about, you know, pain and describing what suffering is and crying and in front of that woman who was your
Yeah.
reflection, if you will, I guess.
Yeah.
And, you know, I thought, well, tears are holy water.
Yeah.
And something else my sponsor said is that all human beings, unless they've dealt with it, they have a reservoir of pain in their heart. And if they don't siphon it off, it can explode.
Yeah.
And you said that in different words.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
I keep siphoning it off through prayer and the like, but one, what is your superpower? And two, when you're stressed, because you're a human being, I assume you come into difficulties once in a while.
Yeah.
How do you deal with them? You know, so what's your superpower? Even if it's God, I don't know, however you
Yeah.
want to say it. But when you have your challenges, how do you do? What do you do about it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just had somebody recently tell me my superpower was networking. And I'm like, really? I don't know about that. But and I really, when he started doing that, when I started doing this work, I don't think I networked that much before. Yeah, I think I don't know, you know, it's a good question. I think about what my strengths are, and I think I think my superpower is just being a little bit good at a lot of things.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's really
I
qualifies
think
as a superpower.
I might co-sign what your friend said, and not being an expert on Ed Treat, but from what I've been able to discover as I was researching you and the like, I listened to a number of the addiction and faith
Yeah.
recordings that you've got on YouTube. And, you know, I even was listening to the Dry January
Uh,
that you posted a few days ago, and I was almost done with it. And, you know, but I had listened to a number of other ones, collaborative with community
yeah.
models and the like. So yeah, all these people, and I was realizing as I was looking things over, I said, geez, this guy is drawing people together in a way that is, you know, a non-believer might call magical, you know? So yeah, maybe your superpower is making the rocks themselves cry out hallelujah. So,
Yeah. You know, I think, you know, now that you mention it, I think it's that it was my super weakness coming in, and that was a fear of being vulnerable. And I think maybe that's my superpower, and that's why people are okay, you know, doing the shows with me and talking with me, because is that you know, I just put myself out there, and I, you know, I love that. That's the gift of this program, because I was so terrified of that now, and now I love to talk about you know, what it's like to be weak and vulnerable, because there's strength in that, you know. And we live in a culture where they, you know, they say, what is the ad we grew up with, never let them see you sweat. And I'm not afraid to let you see me sweat. Yeah.
Well, Jesus cleaned
Not,
other people's feet, and the woman that had tears and, you know, of
mm,
holy water mixed with the sacred oils washed his feet. And he referred to her as, you know, blessed among
yeah.
women, as, you know, as an amazing characteristic of what it means to be humble and in love with someone so much, you know,
Yeah.
that you'll even wash their feet with your tears.
Yeah.
And and I found that quote by Ernie, by the way.
Oh,
He
Ernie
said,
Larson.
yep. He said, pain becomes power when you hold it up to grace. That's
Uh,
was the actual quote.
I
And
think that's what I was trying to say.
yeah, right. And I think that's
Yeah.
what brought
Yeah.
me full circle
Yeah.
back to it.
Yeah. That's good.
So, you know, I guess the question begs to be, asked and maybe answered is, some people swear that this God thing is all a bunch of bogus BS and it's the
Yeah.
opiate of the masses, or however they look at it.
Yeah.
But, and I wouldn't want to slam anybody that is secular, and a lot of jobs that I've worked in were secular, and they allowed me to get away with using the G word on
Yeah.
a rare occasion. And even secular audiences where I've spoken, I get to say God, but
Yeah.
what they might ask you, and this is being the proverbial devil's advocate, I suppose,
Yeah.
well, what can a faith-based or spiritual approach do to help people find sobriety or have a good life that a secular
Yeah.
path can't, and I ask that
Yeah.
without judgment. I'm not saying I believe that.
Yeah. Well, I think I told you I've always believed, and I can't imagine not believing. And so when, I hear people say, they don't get God or they don't see it, I'm always amazed by that, because I don't know. And I don't know that I've really done anything that I get to, or I do. And it's so clear to me. I don't know what the difference is there, why I see it and somebody else doesn't. But I also know I respect that. I have to say that's great. I do know, if we want to talk about what the benefits of faith are, there's studies that are coming out more and more that just indicate longevity of life and quality of life, and all kinds of measures that say faith gives these benefits. I know that there are a lot of people have a hard time with God because of what the church has done and what religion has done, and I understand that. And most times when people say they don't believe in God, I often think to myself, I don't think I've ever said it to someone, but no, I think I actually have. I think I've written this back to people to say that, if they don't believe in God, I say, well, tell me about this God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in that one either. Because usually, people are that reject God are many times rejecting an idea of God that I think is false too. And the problem comes when we say, well, people believe in God. What does that mean? I mean, God is so many different things. You and I probably would come up with all kinds of different ways of talking about that. And so theology is kind of a mushy science. It's not exact science. And so we talk about God. I can see why God gets a bad rap because of what other people say and do in God's name. But I would just challenge people who don't believe in God, challenge them to think about something bigger than what they're imagining of who God is, because there are forces of nature that are many physicists, scientists, really smart people who study quantum theory and relativity and all that fun stuff, who have really deep knowledge, who are all saying, no, there's intelligent design here. I mean, there's forces of nature that are way too amazing to have happened by chance. There's something at work. And the problem is that whenever the first person that begins to define what that something is going to get it wrong, because God is so much bigger and so much more than anything our puny minds can comprehend. But I think we know, my faith has gone through a lot of evolution and still is. But what little I do know about God and believe about God is that force is there. That force is what created me. I didn't create me. I couldn't have come up with ways to knit a body together and make it work with all the chemistry and all that. I mean, that's a really complex, amazing system. I didn't do that. So what's at work that's doing all that? I mean, how does a tree know? How does a seed know to become a tree? I mean, you can come up with scientific, but you really can't really answer that ultimately. There is a wisdom in the forces of nature that are pretty phenomenal. And so what we as human beings, all we can do is reduce that. How I experienced that in my life was that working with my sponsor, I told you I came in with this, kind of this Christianity that was kind of I've got Jesus, and if you just have Jesus like I do, you'll be fine. Meanwhile, I'm in AA, early recovery. It's like, well, wait a minute, why didn't that work? Why in all those years I said, I knew God was the answer to my problems. And all those years I was saying, Jesus, help me. I was reading my Bible, and I knew God was the one who needed to rescue me. And here I am going to an AA meeting with the opportunity to get well. And I'm thinking, well, these people don't have Jesus like I do. So they need this. I don't need this, and I was like, God was offering this as my rescue. The story about the guy on the roof with the boats, a helicopter comes and a boat comes and he keeps saying, no, God's going to save me. And then God says, I sent a boat, 2 helicopters. Anyway, so God sent me a, and I'm like, no, God's going to rescue me. I don't need this. So what had to change in me was not what I believed, that I believed in God. Was the question was, how does God work? Church kind of teaches who God is, and I think AA teaches how God works, and that's what I needed. And so I had to unlearn a lot of things that I thought I knew about God, and it was a sponsor of mine who helped tremendously with those things. But one day we were walking along, we were talking, and he knew I was a little bit of a know-it-all Christian, and he just said, "Tell me about God." And I was like, what? I mean, how often does somebody really ask you to tell you about God? And I'm like, I didn't know quite how to do that. So I said what I thought. And he said, I don't think that's God. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Of course that's God. That's my God. How can you say that's not God? And he said, no. He says, that sounds a lot more like a bigger version of your dad. And I mean, you could have knocked me over. With a feather. I was like, oh my God, my image of God is a bigger version of my dad. And my dad's an asshole. And so, wow, and it was sort of a cross between Genghis Khan and Santa Claus. You never knew what you were going to get. And I thought, boy, I hope that's not really what God is like. And then I said, what am I going to do? Because I agree with you. Who I believe God is, and I don't think is God. And he said, well, write him a letter, let him go, fire him. And I was like, I mean, the idea was just unnerving because it's like, but that's God. You don't confront God. And so I went and wrote this letter. And the more I wrote, the angrier I got. And pretty soon it was just a venting. I just, you've allowed me to, believe lies and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I vented. And I read the letter to my sponsor. We burned it together. And I was like, now what? And he said, well, just let it go. We'll see what happens. God will make God's self known. And so I don't know that I could articulate God as well today as I could back then, but God's just too big to articulate.
The smaller I get, the bigger God gets.
Yeah. And just one word really does it, and that's grace. God just loves us.
Grace is a superpower.
Yeah.
So have you ever heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza?
That sounds familiar. Say more.
He's written a number of books, and one of them was Change Your Brain. And in chapter 2, he said he talked about how people were being healed from incurable disease, spontaneous remission of incurable disease. And he studied that, and prayer was part of it. And it was really interesting study. So science is slowly catching up, if you will. And I don't say that condescendingly, that they're catching up, but it's an evolving science. It's like anything else. Religion also evolves. And I, hopefully think that God talks to us all differently, hoping we'll tell each other. And, and it's up to God to tell us what God is. We can tell each other what we think. And had I not had direct spiritual experiences, there's no way that I would have exited the lifestyles and the belief systems that I had. I've got a joke for you.
Okay.
I woke up at 3:30 in the morning. I heard a bunch of ruckus outside of the house, and it's like, what in the heck, So I jumped out of bed, grabbed my robe, and I went to the living room window, and you'll never guess what I saw outside. There was a group of agnostic bigots burning a question mark in my lawn.
That's funny.
It doesn't qualify as a raunchy humor that the ministers might like, but
that's funny.
You get a little traction out of it. So
yeah, that's good.
As we wind down here, first I'll just say that you're approaching the addiction in the season of Lent. You're going to talk about that, and we can find you where for that?
Yeah, the website is addictionandfaith.com. And you'll find our schedule under the events page, which is under the about. Click on about, and it'll say events. I always recommend our app. We have a free smartphone app that is absolutely chock full of resources. You can get all our webinars. We have a couple of years worth of webinars on a variety of topics, really, really interesting topics and really great speakers.
True.
We have
I've listened to some of them. They're really good people. Check it out.
Yeah, they are. People are like, how do you get these people? And I call them and say, will you do this? And they say, yes. It's really quite amazingly easy. And then we've got a podcast. Did you happen to podcast?
No, I haven't been looking at podcasts. Sorry. I haven't
Yeah.
plowed
So
through
on the app, there's one, it just says podcast, Our Stories of Addiction and Grace. I interview clergy who've gone through the, addiction and recovery, and they tell their stories. And they're really, I don't know why. For me, I think it goes back to my father, Martin Talks. To see clergy go through this and be human is somehow inspirational to me, to say, even a pastor, struggles with this and can find grace and recovery. And anyway, so their stories are on there. I have quite a number of podcasts of clergy and recovery. One is a bishop. The bishop had just been elected to bishop. He wasn't expecting it, but his name got put in. He got picked in a long process that they go through to pick a bishop. And here he is, full-blown drinking problem, and he's the new bishop. And within about 3 weeks, his staff does an intervention. His new staff sees, what's going on, and they sit down with him and say, you need help. So he goes off to treatment, and he stays bishop and comes back and does his work. And it's really a great inspirational story of what he goes through. But yeah, and then we have really on there, it is interesting. After I did these, I thought, I hope these are any good. And then my wife and I would drive and listen to them, and we both just said, those are really good. Their stories are their redemption stories, and how it's what we listen to in 12-step meetings. I mean, that's why these stories never get old, because it's not about that bishop. It's about what God did. They're God stories. Yeah. And so anyway, that app, everybody looks at that app says, I can't believe all these resources on here. It's free. It's in your app store. Just look for Center of Addiction and Faith. And if you don't like it, you can delete it, but it's really worth checking out.
Yeah, I'll put all these links down as well, but I thought it'd be great if you could mention them.
Yep.
Now, you also said you have some online meetings. Now, I know the couple of them are not for clergy. How do people find those?
Yep. So those are really easy to find on our app.
Okay.
You click on that, and they'll link right in there. If you're going to attend the meeting on your phone, that's really quick and easy. Okay, otherwise, you go to our website, addictionandfaith.com. Click on about events, and under each of the meetings, there's a link. If you're clergy and you want to come to the clergy only, you need to email me or Melanie. There's an email for Melanie on there that you can click and say, I'm clergy, and she'll ask you a couple of questions to verify that you are, because we need to kind of make sure that it's strictly clergy, and she'll let you into that meeting. But the other two meetings, I recommend to people who love recovery and may also have a good relationship with their church, because the people who come to these are people who live in both those worlds and speak both the languages and are comfortable speaking. Not everybody can talk about their faith and or their church in a 12-step meeting. And people want to. I mean, if your faith is important to you and it's part of your program, then gosh, you need to share that. So this is a place where churchgoers can feel comfortable. It's not that we only talk about church and religion, hardly really. Mostly it's topics that you normally hear in a 12-step meeting, like gratitude and the steps. But we can reference church stuff like Lent, and everybody will know what that means. You talk about Lent in a regular 12-step meeting, and 2/3 will go, what? What's Lent? Oh, he borrowed something?
Yeah, I asked what people had on their forehead once upon a time.
Yeah, the smudge.
Yeah. I thought they.
So yeah. So we're doing a thing on Lent this month on the 24th at 11 a.m. Central, and it's addiction and Lent. And we have a Episcopalian pastor who's done a lot of work. He's in recovery, and he's done a lot of work connecting the themes of Lent to the steps and because Lent is a time of self-examination, and the 12 steps call us to examine. So he's saying these practices have been part of the church for a long, long time. It's just reminding ourselves why why we do them and what they're supposed to do. And sometimes we go to church and we just go through the motions and not think about, what's there. But there's some pretty good practices and ways to think about our faith and about our spiritual journey that the church has, and they've been around for many, many centuries that are useful. And
so
just like with it,
you've got your conference coming up in October, you said, and is that every October?
So far, it's every October.
So far, okay.
We'll have one this October in Bloomington. We are thinking about maybe expanding to do different parts of the country, like East, West Coast. Maybe 3 conferences a year, and maybe make them a little bit smaller. But we didn't meet in 2020 because of COVID, and then we had to meet in 2021, even though COVID was spiking again. But the hotel contract forced us to go ahead with it. So we were about a third of what we normally were in the first 2 conferences. And then we did a hybrid event, so a lot of people attended online. But it was as good as any of our conferences. The speakers were amazing. On our YouTube channel, if you go to YouTube and look for Center of Addiction and Faith, all of our videos are on there, and you'll see many of the conference speakers there. Tim King was the keynote speaker at our last conference, and he gave a talk that was just outstanding. He ties the addiction and our current contemporary societal response to addiction to the story of Jonah and the reluctance to deal with these people of Nineveh. He doesn't want God to save them, and he's pissed that God does, and he's pissed that God's using him to do it. And anyways, he makes some really great ties to that whole story and why our society seems so reluctant to deal with addiction.
Well, I really liked the part when you were first starting off talking about Moses and God telling him to quit praying and do something.
Yeah,
that was really good. That's
Isn't
a
that?
takeaway. I'm going to rip you off for that one. I mean, I
got
know
it.
it was in the Bible, so
Yeah,
but that put something in the perspective with me that I just wasn't quite getting.
Yeah.
So my last question for you is, if you could heal the world of one thing, what would it be?
Intolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Amen.
That's the one thing I can't tolerate is intolerance.
Yeah, I think it was a pastor, or no, a philosopher that said the road to hell is paved with Harvard degrees. I thought that was kind of humorous, but
Yeah.
we can educate ourselves in the judgment more easily than we can educate ourselves out of it, and it's just, if we soften our heart, turn our will and our lives over to the care of God, I think it goes a long ways, and just remove the obstacles that separate us from God. And separation consciousness is like hell on earth. And C.S. Lewis said, the door to hell is only open from the inside, that whole thing.
Yeah.
But I'll just say one thing is the woman that used to hate me and didn't care if I went to hell or not, she got to a point in her life because of 12-step work and my work with MAD. It took a great many years, but she finally reached out to me and we became friends. See, I had killed her son, and driving impaired, I ran him over in a baby stroller, and and to this day, she said it was the
That's
hardest.
part of your story?
Yeah, that was the hardest day of her life, but now she said she loves me and forgives me.
Oh my gosh.
And
I need to hear that
testament to
story.
her faith.
That's an incredible story.
I'll see if I can find some recording of it or something,
Yeah, I would love to hear that. That's pretty powerful stuff.
God,
you must have gone through.
Yeah, I went through a lot.
Stuff.
Yeah. And now she's.
And here you are now. Spreading the message to those who still suffer.
Right on, bro.
So that's impressive.
Well, I appreciate your being on board with us, and I will just say God bless one and all that tuned in and stayed with us here. And, hopefully you got some nuggets of gold you can pass on to other people. And, if you want to keep it, you got to give it away. That's how it
Amen.
works,
Amen.
So thank you for sharing your story of addiction and your rising through faith. I'm glad you're a resurrection person rather than still in the tomb. So right on, brother.
I love
And,
it.
next
Thanks,
time for
Timothy.
the incomplete skeptic and sober wise guy. See you guys. I'll
Thank you, Tim.
keep you
Timothy.
plugged in, let you know when the recording is all done.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
All right, man. Peace
All
out.
right. God bless you.
Thank you. You too.